these new startups, they emerge so quickly and they take away bits of your business before you know it. And so
one product which is a really good fit, and there is a corporate with this kind of a need.
What is the percentage of failure in their teams while implementing these corporate innovation concepts?
what we're interested in when we're working in corporate innovation context, right, is for our innovators to be authentic. Take internal teams, we're going to second them from their jobs. They can apply to join.
Tools and instruments to identify the potential of the business model.
You certainly realize that if you're working in a corporate, there's no way your ideas are going out to the world unless you collaborate with other people.
Good day to everyone. This is InnMind channel with the best first-hand information for startup founders and tech entrepreneurs. And today we want to dig deeper into the topic of corporate innovation, which is quite mysterious theme for a lot of startups because they simply talk different language with corporates very often, but they have to find common language. And of course, this is super actual topic for corporate ventures and corporate innovators because they face so many obstacles that we can't stay away from this theme. And we invited really great expert in this field. We invited Tendayi Viki, who is corporate innovation expert and also associate partner at Strategyzer. You all know Strategyzer from our interviews with Alex Osterwalder. So hello, Tendayi.
Hey, thank you for having me. Awesome. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you for accepting our invite, Tendayi. And I also want to introduce those of you who don't know yet, Ekaterina Naimushina from InnMind Corporate Venture Team. Hi, Ekaterina.
Hi there.
And today we have very unusual setup because Tendayi is our invited guest and speaker, and we will interview him together. So I hope it will be a fun discussion. And my first question, Tendayi, if you allow, is during years that you work in this corporate innovation sector, and you, in many interviews, you told how your experience evolved when at the beginning you had to make corporate clients understand the value of corporate innovation. And right now they are coming to you willing to understand how to build it, but they already know that it is super valuable. So are there any recent changes due to pandemic in the sector?
Yeah, so what's interesting was this was already kind of happening before the pandemic. So we already had a whole bunch of clients that were already coming to us and asking us to do work to help them develop their corporate innovation practices. And so what the pandemic did was it just accelerated those questions. And so it then made it really clear that if you don't start treating your innovation capability like a muscle, right? Like a muscle that you exercise all the time. By the time you get a crisis, you haven't developed that muscle, it becomes harder. Like I always say, you know, it's but by the time you get a heart attack, it's too late to start jogging, right? So that's really the situation that a lot of leaders sort of found themselves in. And so we're getting even more and more questions about how do you build really strong corporate innovation practices. Yeah.
Awesome. And what are the main obstacles when they already took the decision that they want to build something around corporate innovation, but maybe even don't know where to start from?
Yeah, so the major obstacle, and people always ask me the question, you know, why do corporates, you know, struggle with innovation? Well, corporates struggle with innovation because they already have a successful business. So that's why, that's the root of the struggle. They already have a successful business, they're already scaling, they're already making a lot of money, and all of that has to be managed, which is a reasonable thing to expect, right? If you have a successful business, you should build structures to manage it. If you have customers, you should build structures to serve them. If you have products, you should build structures to manufacture and, you know, channels to deliver those in. You should build your logistic systems and all of that stuff. So what then tends to happen is that entire preoccupation with running a successful business really constrains the extent to which leaders can engage properly with driving innovation. And so the first mistake they then make is they try and take their innovation projects and try and manage them in the same way that they manage the core business. And the moment they do that, they start to break all the things, even though they do with good intentions, they start to break up all the positive outcomes that they could potentially create from innovation.
And what is like the main reason for the innovation in the first place? You mentioned that they're already, building successful businesses, but what are the main reasons apart maybe from staying ahead of the competition? Why is it so necessary?
Yeah, so I mean, I remember meeting somebody who told me that at some point, I don't know, like a decade or so ago, every corporate leader was talking about growing their companies by moving to China or entering the Southeast Asia markets, et cetera, et cetera. And so after a while, they suddenly realized that okay, that growth has kind of peaked and it's gotten to a certain level. They can't really push it above that level. And so now there's a realization that the best way to build sustainable growth is to innovate. Right? You have to be creating new products, new offerings, and new value propositions. So that's one half of the equation, which is people are always constantly looking to create new growth. And sometimes when you've got a mature business, you can only grow so far. So that's one part. And then the other part is there's a recognition that disruption is faster now. Like, these new startups, they emerge so quickly and they take away bits of your business before you know it. And so you needed to respond to all the changes that that are happening around you that were already happening before the pandemic. And then some of those got accelerated during the pandemic. And so those two combinations of like constantly looking for growth, because somehow growth is a capitalist imperative. Like companies have to keep finding new ways to grow. And then you combine that with like constant disruption eating away at your business. Now you got to find ways to respond to that. And so that's really what's triggering them to sort of start looking for innovation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very good point. And you know what? During this whole innovation process, I mean, the main sources of this type of innovation is actually the startup teams who are having already a ready-made solution. They have already a product to be integrated. And at InnMind, we face a lot of this type of the situations when, there is one product which is a really good fit and there is a corporate with this kind of a need. And why is it so difficult to connect them all together and achieve this final integration of the product? Do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's like the same thing as saying, well, I mean, we're trying to make all these pirates join this navy. Why is there a problem with pirates joining the navy? It's like, well, the navy is structured. It's got rules. It's got pre-existing systems that they bought from Oracle or from SAP. It's got all of these things, right? Meanwhile, the startup is scrappy. There's 4 of them. They can move quickly. They can make decisions just on a roll like that. And also, sometimes just because a startup has discovered a new product or technology does not mean that they're ready for scale. Steve Blank has got a really cool concept. He calls it the investment readiness levels, where he measures like startups as they move on their journey from like, a problem solution fit to product market fit to ready for scale. And sometimes what large companies do is they find a startup that's a problem solution fit that created something that really fits a customer need, but that startup still hasn't figured out the right business model to scale that, right? And then they take the startup and they plug it into their systems, but the systems are only designed for people who already know what they're doing in terms of selling, scaling, growing, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a mismatch between how the startup is being managed in the integration and where the startup is on the innovation journey. And so all of those things are things that have to be integrated and made to work well together. Otherwise, you will always see this kind of struggle.
Yeah, very good point. And speaking about the challenges within the internal departments, at InnMind, CVC department, we face a lot of this. And one of the main challenges, when launching some sort of open calls for innovators or challenges, there is a lot of struggle of how to keep the business units motivated till the end of the project. Whenever you start looking for a new solution, you always align the needs from the business units to be in place, and then the business units have their own work, and at the end of the projects they just disappear sometimes. So how to keep them motivated throughout the project?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one, right? It's the same problem you're talking about corporate venture capital, right? And the integration of external startups, but internal innovation teams have the exact same problem. So, you set up an innovation lab, you fund teams to work in that innovation lab, and then as those teams start finding something that's really great for the company that could be scalable, they can't find any internal champions to help them scale it. Like everybody's too busy meeting their own goals. And that's simply because even though we have a corporate venture capital arm, even though we're collaborating with startups, often the leaders that are driving these businesses that are supposed to take up the solution, they don't have that on their goals at all. Like it's not even it's not even part of the plan. Most of the time, when they're talking to their C-level bosses, they're just being asked about revenue in next quarter and next quarter and next quarter. And if the revenue looks like it's about to drop because of COVID, all hands on deck to drive that, right? So when you turn up and go, hey, I'm Ekaterina, I've got this really cool thing. And it's like, your cool thing right now is a distraction for the things that I've been asked to do by my leadership. And so one of the things that really, really matters is to incentivize the adoption of these products in a way that we reward and celebrate these leaders. Because if it's not part of that, then people are going to walk away from it. Like, because if you know that this is part of how you're going to get promoted, celebrated, and rewarded, you're not going to walk away from it. But if you know that it's just a side thing, an interesting, fun side thing, you are going to walk away from it, to chase the priorities that you've been given.
But that's amazing that you mentioned this about incentivization of adoption. This is indeed the core outcome that should be actually the result of these corporate innovation activities, yes? And when should let's say, we take some abstract corporate innovator, yeah, who wants to move their company into that amazing space. And when do they need to start thinking about adoption? Before launching the corporate innovation challenges, activities, or during, like, let's do it and see what happens and what we will have as the result?
As soon as possible. That's my answer to you. I would do it before I even start a challenge. And here's how the conversation goes. Hey, business X, hey, business Y, what are the things that are strategically interesting for you right now? What problems are you facing right now? What challenges are you facing right now that we as an innovation team or a corporate venture capital team could help you solve? Okay. So now when we go into the ideation piece, we're already ideating around things that people care about. Okay. And then when the ideation is complete, or even during the ideation process, your job as the corporate innovator is to make the results of the ideation transparent to your colleague who is in the core business, to say, here are the results of the ideation process. Which of these things do you think, if it ever became successful, you might be willing to integrate it into your business? And they can tell you straight away that, I don't care if customers want that, even if it became really cool, I would never integrate that because of XYZ reason. So you already know, okay, we can work on that, but it's not really important to my partner. Or they can say, you know what, just go find out some stuff and keep me posted on what you're doing. And then it becomes your job. And I often say this to especially heads of innovation who are running innovation labs. It's your job to constantly, on a month-by-month basis, tell the core business that, look over there in the distance, there's like 10 projects that are walking this way. 3 of them are walking really fast. They're really, really close to finding product market fit. And eventually they're going to need investment to scale and access to sales and access to marketing. So is there something we can start to do right now to prepare for their arrival? Right? And if you face resistance, you already know, as those projects are coming through, where the pockets of resistance are, because you've already started to try and build the landing platform for them. But we don't do that when we're running our innovation labs. We work on our stuff. And then when we found something really cool and we're really happy with it, that's the day we turn up and go, hey, you remember me? I'm the guy with Project X. And nobody cares, not because Project X is not cool, but because they're already busy doing something else. Right? You can imagine, like, for example, just me as Tendayi Viki, the number of inbound requests I get to come and give talks or come and meet somebody, et cetera, et cetera. Like, my capacity to to respond to all of those things starts to diminish over time, which is a reasonable expectation. But if it's somebody I already know, who I built a relationship with over the years, I'll respond to them immediately. And so you have to build a similar sort of thing with your leadership if you're a corporate innovator. So
the core point here is 1, 2, 3 times per year, some events related to innovation, corporate innovation, is simply not enough. You should have consistent, regular work with your business units to explain them the value, to create this FOMO, fear of missing out, yes, and to make them understand how important it is on strategic level for each of them, correct?
Yes, you need to create FOMO, fear of missing out. You need to create YOLO, you only live once. Whatever you need to do to create this interest in the stuff that you're working on. So here's a survey that I often run when I'm running my workshops. I ask people, what is the most important characteristic for a corporate innovator to have? And I ask them, there's like a list of them, and stuff is like, intrinsically motivated, really great with ambiguity, great entrepreneurial skills. And then the last one I put in is political acumen. Right? And people will choose the other 3 before they choose the political acumen. But actually, as a corporate innovator, the other 3 are not as important as your political acumen. Corporate innovation is politics. That's all it is, right? So you need to obviously be good at coming up with cool things, testing ideas, and inventing new things. But that's almost like the 10%, the 90%, or let's call that the 20%. The 80% of the time is lining up all of these pieces that are gonna help you scale. Because that's the value of being an innovator inside a corporate. It is that you have access to resources that typical startups don't have. You have access to a big sales, you have access to customers, you have access to a brand. So if you have access to all of those things and you don't line them up to boost you when you're ready, then you lose the value. You might as well just go into a startup, right? And so that's corporate innovators have to be conscious of that. That's the job, effectively, right? That's the job.
And when you do all these workshops and make all these surveys, etc., so after you deliver the core program to corporate innovation teams, do you make some assessments finally when you already finished working with each other? What is the percentage of failure in their teams while implementing this corporate innovation concepts?
Yes. So I saw Alex Osterwalder do this when you were interviewing him, so I'm going to do it as well, which is drawing.
Whiteboard.
Exactly.
Whiteboard. Oh, great. I missed it.
So I'm going to whiteboard some stuff for you, right? So this is pretty cool. Can you see my screen, the one I'm sharing?
Yes, very well.
All right, great. So what we're interested in when we're working in corporate innovation context, and let me just move this here so I'm looking at the right thing. So what we're interested in when we're working in corporate innovation context, right, is for our innovators to be authentic, right, to be true to the goals that they're trying to pursue. And what I often say to innovators is that there are 2 dimensions upon which you're actually working. Okay, so the first dimension is what we call value creation, which is that the projects and products and services you're working on are eventually going to deliver some value to the organization. They're going to end up increasing revenue or increasing profits, or maybe even reducing costs, but you're creating value, okay? So value creation matters. So on one dimension is value. And the reason I emphasize value is we want to avoid innovation theater, which is ideation competitions and hackathons and all of these things, right? We want all of those things to be done in service of value creation. So if we have an ideation competition, we don't just care that the competition was such a success and everyone is so involved. What we really care about is what happens to the ideas once we have them. Are we able to take them from idea to business model, right? So that's value creation. Now, another piece that really matters when you're a corporate innovator is the creation of infrastructure, because it's impossible to really do innovation well if you don't have some sort of culture change within the organization, building the right processes, building the right systems, right? So we put it down here and we go, okay, so culture change is really important, making sure you have the right tools, making sure you have the right skills, et cetera, et cetera. So when I'm having a conversation with teams, I ask them this particular question. Let's take all the innovation programs that you have inside your organization. So, and let's take them all. Let's take the innovation lab. So let's make them like sticky notes, right? So we'll take the innovation lab, we'll put it there. We'll take the hackathon, we'll put it there. We'll take all the events you have. We'll take the ideation competition. We'll take the sprints, whatever other corporate innovations that you're doing, and we'll map them there, right? And then we'll start to have an assessment conversation, which is, to what extent is any one of these programs creating value or driving cultural change, right? And what you find is that, like, once you do the 2 by 2 like this, right? Some of these programs end up being, interestingly, in this corner here.
Minimum value and minimum
value and minimum change. And then the question is, well, why does that program exist, right? And then you'll find some other programs that are pretty cool. Like, you can drive real culture change if you run a really great education program. You can drive real culture change if you drive a really, really great sort of a training program. Maybe you can build innovation coaches. You can do that and really, really drive great value with that. And then you will find some really great programs, like, you know, when people acquire startups, right, that sort of create value. You'll find some really great programs where people are working with teams and launching new products. And then sometimes you can have some programs that drive both. But this is often what we see. And we call that innovation theater. Things that look like innovation, but ultimately create no value, right? And that's what we want to stop organizations from actually doing. And that's the assessment that we do. And then we can start to have a conversation, right, where we ask each other questions. Okay, so what changes do we need to make in order to move these things into the right places where they're supposed to be? And that's really the conversation that we drive. Yeah.
Oh my God, I love your approach in Strategyzer. Why no one else but only you guys are doing this? It's amazing.
Yeah, that's because we're a visual company. So sorry, I had to close the door. There was someone walking. You can always edit all that stuff out. So yeah, that's because we're a visual company, right? So we're making visual things. Yeah.
And I was wondering, like, what are these type of the ideal, you know, setups and the events that drive both, like, value and culture? Do you have any ideas, like samples or examples?
Yeah. So for example, right, you could say we're going to set up an accelerator program. And as part of the accelerator program, we're going to take internal teams. We're going to second them from their jobs. They can apply to join, and we're going to run this program with 12 teams. Okay. Now, you can then decide two things. Are we just going to focus on helping these teams finish their innovation projects, or are we going to use this accelerator program to drive other changes within the organization? So then you can attach to the accelerator program training workshops, coaching series. You can host events where you bring other people from the organization to see what the teams are working on. You know, updates that are sort of all over the place. You can create an online platform channel where teams are recording their work, et cetera, as a way to influence. And now you've leveraged the singular sort of approach, and you've used it for both value creation and culture change. And a really great example of this, which is even more powerful, was what was happening at Bayer. So Bayer run an innovation program. Well, they used to run an innovation program they called the Catalyst Fund, where people could apply to join, and they used to take 10, 12 teams, and they would put them through this 3-month program. And what they realized was that all the teams that come to the Catalyst Fund often have to negotiate with legal and compliance and procurement to be allowed to run experiments and to do all these various things. And so what they decided to do was to bring legal, compliance, and procurement into the Catalyst process and run a series of workshops and conversations about how you can design legal, compliance, and procurement to support innovation. And so they were leveraging the existence of the Catalyst Fund as a way to show how innovation works, and at the same time creating infrastructure so that future innovators don't have to keep negotiating with legal and compliance. And in the end, they created a framework with a guiding document, and even got people from the legal and procurement side to be supporters, right, that keep driving the process for them. So even if the Catalyst Fund closes, you've still got this structure or this infrastructure that you've created. And so that's really value creation, right? It's much more than just let's get some pizza and beer and let's do something cool together, right? It's completely different, right?
Yeah, I fully agree. It sounds like crazy cool example, and I'm just wondering why it is not copied by many other actors in the market. Is it because it is not yet visible enough on the industry, does not have enough awareness, or there are some other reasons like competition between corporates, etc.?
I think that, I mean, there's a transition happening, right? People can see what matters and what doesn't matter. I think as you start to create best practice in any sort of field, you start to learn what works versus what doesn't work. And what has hurt corporate innovation is that we have tended to celebrate the entrepreneur too much. So the person who starts their own startup and is buccaneering and they're a pirate and they're a disruptor and all of these things, like we celebrate the entrepreneur too much. And so what happens is when people get a job as a corporate innovator inside a corporate, they're trying to mimic the behaviors of the entrepreneur. But actually, the only thing you're supposed to bring from the entrepreneur is the ability to come up with ideas, test ideas, and find business models that actually work. Everything else that we celebrate about entrepreneurs, you should leave that at the door. And so what we find is, for example, companies will say, we're going to hire somebody who just sold their startup. They're going to come and join our company as entrepreneur in residence. It'll be like this former startup founder. He's a buccaneering guy. It's typically a male. He's wearing jeans. He's got like a nice blazer with a t-shirt. And he's holding kale juice. And he's walking around the company talking about how all these MBAs don't know what they're doing and how he's going to save them from disruption and all this stuff, right? And he's like burning bridges that need to be built up just by the manner in which he's conducting himself within the organization. And that is a lesson that I learned myself from how I was behaving. And then I also learned from watching others get burnt like that, right? And so you can always set the timer, like which corporate innovator is going to flame out quickly and which one is going to last long term, but just how they conduct themselves within the organization. And so we're learning and we're definitely getting better.
You told that you learned it on your experience. Have you been this guy, entrepreneur at residence?
Yes, I've been this. No, I haven't been an entrepreneur in residence, but I've been the jerk with the kale juice. I haven't been an entrepreneur in residence, but I've definitely been the jerk with the kale juice. I remember when I first started my role at Pearson, my style was pretty aggressive, like telling people, the publishing industry is dying. Your jobs are going away. If you don't change, you're going to need to ... And people are just like, whatever, right? Like, we don't care. Your approach is making us already hate you. We already hated innovation and now we hate you. So now we're actively rooting for you to fail. Like, you don't have people that are actively rooting for you to succeed. It's already hard being an innovator without creating people that are actively rooting for you to fail. And so, you learn after a year of that actually you need to build relationships, and relationships really, really matter for success.
Yeah, and actually that's very wise what you're saying, and amazing example, not only in corporate innovation, but in many, many other aspects, because very often we see that people, instead of building the bridges, establishing relationship and trying to adopt themselves as well, to be on one language, one wave with the potential partners or clients, they do the opposite. They push the differences, underline all the black and white things, and try to create this opposite feeling. Maybe they hope that this will bring more attention, but at the end of the day, we have different stories. Yes.
Yeah, no, it will bring attention. It's just not the kind of attention you want. Yeah. So you really have to be thinking about that. Really cool story from colleagues of mine from TD Ameritrade. We were working with them, as Strategyzer, trying to help them develop their innovation process. And so I asked, when we were working together, what made you bring us in? And they were like, well, we actually need your help because when we first started doing our innovation work, we used to call ourselves the home for homeless ideas. So they used to call themselves the home for homeless ideas. So any idea that the company doesn't want to work on or you've been rejected elsewhere, come to us. We're the home for homeless ideas. And then he said, after doing that for a little while, we suddenly realized that if an idea is homeless when it comes to us, it will be homeless when it leaves. Like, we never had any one of those homeless ideas find a home just because they came to us. So in the end, if nobody in the company wanted to work with it at the beginning, they won't want to work with it once it's become successful. Now they hate it even more. It's now a bigger problem, right? So it's something that you have to be thinking about.
Homeless innovation sounds beautiful. I've seen a lot of people recently who write in their background from homeless to entrepreneur, or from homeless to billionaire. But homeless innovation, I didn't.
Yeah, that homeless to billionaire only works in the outside world. Yeah, no, there's no homeless idea that became $1 billion idea inside a corporate. It might have to leave the corporate to actually do that. Yeah.
Okay, Tendayi, you also wrote in your beautiful graph this value to culture thing. And speaking about value out of corporate innovation, so they should be somehow assessed by Kpis, yes? And
Yes.
what is your recommendation? I know that it depends case by case, but I'm sure there are some general recommendations on how to set up KPIs for corporate innovation activities.
Yes, so let's actually talk about, like, before we set up the KPI, right? Let's really have a conversation about what it is that we're interested in assessing, right? Like, what is a good idea? Like, how do we know an innovation has succeeded? Like, what has to happen before an innovation succeeds? And so, what is successful innovation? So we put innovation over here, right? And then we say, okay, what do we need? And what a lot of people tend to do is they think that, ideas and maybe even like really great technologies, like once you have that, you've become really successful. But actually, that's not what really drives innovation success, right? What really drives innovation success is when you combine these ideas and technologies with customer value, which means making stuff people want, right? So that matters. Okay, so that's one thing that you have to make sure that you're creating. And then on top of that, you also have to combine it with a scalable business model. Okay, so you need ideas plus customer value plus business model. And then we say, okay, you've succeeded as an innovator. Because ideas are a dime a dozen. I had 20 ideas on my way to work today. None of those are ever going to become anything important, right? And a lot of people value ideas a lot. But the question is, are those ideas delivering value to customers, or at least delivering value to even your business? So the first thing you need to solve for is what we call desirability. Who wants this? Who needs this, etc. And then after that, you then have to solve for business model. Do you know why? Because it's actually possible to make stuff people want and then lose money doing it. Because even if they want it, they won't pay what is necessary to scale that idea. And so it's really important that we solve for both of these things. We need to solve for customer value and we need to solve for business model.
And can you bring some example on how do you utilize this formula?
Right. So now you have to say, okay, so if this is the equation that I'm trying to solve, what are the characteristics of this, okay? And then you say, okay, well, actually, there's only like 4 things that you need to solve for, right? The first thing you need to solve for is something we call desirability, right? Which is who wants this, or, we call it should it be done? Like, even if you did it, who cares, right? Should it be done, right? Should it be done? And then the other thing you need to sort of solve for is, can we create it? Which is what the ideas and technologies are. So that's feasibility. Okay. And which is, can it be done? Now, if it can be done and it should be done, then the real question becomes, can it be done profitably? Which is your viability, right? Can you do all of this, right? Can it be done profitably? Or can it be done with profits? Okay, so now you've got these are the metrics. You've now got your 3 layers of metrics, but there's a final one that people tend to forget. If it can be done and should be done and can be done profitably, the next or final piece that you need to solve for is scalability. We call it adaptability as Strategyzer, but it's really just about scale, which is, can it be done at scale? Okay, so now we've got the things we need to measure to ensure that an innovation is on track towards success, right? And so the fundamental question that every leader should ask themselves if they're driving innovation, whenever you see an innovation team come up to you and they're working on stuff, just ask yourself this question. Always. This is the innovation question, okay? The most important innovation question ever, the only innovation question that actually matters is, how close is this team to finding, and I need to, my spelling here is not really great, so let me just fix that, right? To finding a business model that works. Okay, how close are you to finding a business model that works? That's the question.
Indeed. I mean, and I have like a follow-up question to this, because I mean, you've mentioned the last part, which is business model, and you know, the main question here is about the business model scalability. And in this regard, what do you think, in our opinion, and based on like our experience, what we saw is that CVCs, corporate ventures, actually play a very big role in the whole, you know, innovation process and open innovation laboratory. And in terms of the business model, these guys in the CVC department, they have all the you know, all the tools and instruments to identify the potential of the business model through the due diligence whenever they meet with a startup. So what is your opinion on that? Is it true?
I don't think that's true, because when we do due diligence, we're asking business case questions. We're asking, remember I said at the beginning of our conversation that the number one reason why innovation struggles inside organizations is because they take the practices from the core business and they apply them to innovation. So if you go there and you say to a startup team, how many customers do you have? How much revenue do you have? How much, what is your projected revenue for year 5 or whatever, right? And the startup just makes up the numbers. In year 5, we're gonna have, you know, 5 million a year or whatever, right? And they're like, oh, we've done our due diligence. So we're asking the wrong questions. We're not asking, how close are you to finding a business model that works? Because if we were, we would ask for evidence of customer need. Have you validated that there's a real customer need that faces a substantially profitable market? We would look for evidence of feasibility. Have you validated that you can create the value proposition at a cost base that's really useful for a company like ours? You know, viability. If you then do the difference between those two things, have you really got evidence that you can scale this profitably, right? Do you have evidence that you're growing? So we need to measure the right metrics about growth. We need to measure the right metrics about profitability. But this desirability and feasibility piece that we tend to ignore is really what matters, because it's the fundamental root of what drives a successful company. And that's why Steve Blank created those investment readiness levels, because he was like, the first layer of investment readiness is finding a real customer with a real need. Then the next layer of investment readiness is making sure that you can deliver to that need. And then the next layer of investment readiness level is making sure you can now do that in a way that generates revenue and profitability. And then the next level is making sure you can do that in a repeatable way that scales. And we're not benchmarking the startups we're acquiring or the technology we're acquiring against any of those metrics. Instead, we're just going, yeah, the business case seems convincing. Let's bring them in, right? And then we plug them into our machine, and then everything sort of breaks there.
Okay, got ya. But Tendayi, what is the core difference between corporate innovation activities through collaboration with startups and the same but through collaboration with R&D offices, laboratories, universities, etc.? Because also startups and R&D scientists are so different, but some corporate innovators have to go to the scientific part, to universities or labs. So what's the core difference in the approach from corporate innovators' side?
So the number one difference between those two groups of people is only one of those has a business model imperative, and that's the startup.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. That is why I asked this question. But in another way, in the R&D part, you can't ask about business model.
No, with the R&D teams, most of the time they're not thinking about the business model, right? They're researching technologies, they're trying to find breakthroughs there, and that's their remit, and that's fair. Like, we should keep investing in those things because that's the seed for innovation. The question is, how do you transition that technology into your business? What do you build around that technology so that you can then add these other elements, right? Whereas if you're onboarding a startup, what you're having to do is evaluate where they are in terms of investment readiness levels. When you're trying to onboard a technology from R&D, you're starting from scratch in terms of like, so who's the customer for this thing? And what value are we going to create? Can we manufacture this repeatedly, right? Can we, does it scale? Who are we going to sell it to? So you're having to build all of that around the technology coming from R&D, which is a little bit different than what you have to do with startups.
Okay, got ya. Tendayi, you wrote also amazing book, and I did not tell it in the intro, but I can't say asking about that. Pirates in the Navy, which exactly approaches this problem in corporate innovations and tells a lot about leadership in the teams, about influencing corporate innovation mindset. And in this book, you call corporate innovators pirates. Isn't it contradicting with what you've said about in the first part of the interview about these guys, entrepreneurs at residence? So pirates are something similar also. They come to the office and try to make a big boom. So why do you call them pirates?
No, I don't call them pirates. So that's what's interesting about the book, right? Which is when I was doing research while I was writing the book, we were having conversations about why do innovators call themselves pirates, and the book title is actually a play on words from Steve Jobs, because Steve Jobs said it's better to be a pirate than to join the Navy, and I was like, well, for corporates, if they want to innovate, they have to find pirates in the Navy. You have to find pirates who can function in the Navy. So the book became Pirates in the Navy, which is that's where that actually came from. But the thing I learned while I was writing the book was not all pirates are the same. Right? Historically, there are like different types of pirates. There are typical pirates or buccaneers or whatever, right, who are criminals. They're unattached to any institution. They just roam the high seas and they steal and rob and loot. And if they're caught, they're made to walk the plank. They're killed, which is the same thing as the guy we were talking about with the kale juice, right? He's just a pirate. He's just disrupting everything and making a big boom, like you said, right? They're sort of making this sort of noise. There's another class of pirates that are called privateers. And these are entrepreneurial, buccaneering, going out into the world to do things, but they do that on behalf of an institution. So privateers are pirates that are attached to a particular country. So for example, Sir Francis Drake was referred to as Queen Elizabeth's pirate because he worked for England, and he would go on the high seas and he would attack enemy ships, like, raid Spanish ships, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the difference between Sir Francis Drake and a typical pirate is when Sir Francis Drake came back with the loot from raiding Spanish ships, there was an institution that was ready to welcome him and go, thank you for the loot, and here's a knighthood. We dub you Sir Francis Drake, right? And that's exactly the conversation we've been having this whole time, which is the struggle that innovators have when they go out into the world and they discover things and then they bring it back to the company and nobody's there to embrace them because they were operating like the pirate criminal rather than the pirate privateer. And so learning that distinction, even though it's, we're using it in a sort of a metaphorical, symbolic way, but just learning that distinction can be helpful for a corporate innovator in terms of thinking about who they want to be.
Okay, what I got from here is corporate innovators call themselves pirates, but Tendayi does not call them pirates, yes?
Yeah, exactly.
Behave like bad pirates, they should be more like good ones.
I don't know whether there's any such thing as a good pirate. There's only a pirate that is not collaborating with the core business and a pirate that is collaborating with the core business. And the pirate that's collaborating with the core business, we call that pirate a privateer. And we might even call a pirate that's not collaborating with the core business a buccaneer, right? Like these are totally different groups.
Okay, don't be pirate, be privateer.
Yes, that's really I should have just called it privateers, but that's not really an interesting title. So pirates in the Navy works better.
Okay.
I don't think anyone is going to buy a book called Privateers.
You indeed tell a lot in your book about building relationship, and also an very interesting idea was that instead of creativity in corporate innovation, you should focus more on management and not creativity. Can you a little bit elaborate on that?
Yes, so we've already done the relationships part, right? Which is you can't succeed as an innovator without building relationships. Creativity is an important ingredient in innovation, but what makes the difference, or what changes something from just being a creative idea to being an innovation, is when you add these other elements we just spoke about, right? When you add value proposition, making stuff people want. When you add a business model, where are we going to find the people? What are the channels? How are we going to deliver the value to them? How much are they going to pay? How are we going to manufacture the thing? Like, once you start figuring that out, now you're an innovator. And so there's difference between let's come up with ideas, which is different from let's innovate. But people tend to think that those two things are the same things, right? And they're not. They're not the same things. One is a process for turning ideas to impact, and the other one is just creativity. And so that distinction really, really matters. So, which then leads to the question of why you need to be a privateer. Because then if you think, okay, it's not enough that I just have ideas. The other thing that matters is that my ideas go out into the world. You certainly realize that if you're working in a corporate, there's no way your ideas are going out to the world unless you collaborate with other people. And the moment you realize that, it forces you to have to build those bridges. You know you have to collaborate with sales. You know you have to collaborate with legal. You know you have to collaborate with finance and HR to recruit more people to your team. Like, you know you have to build those bridges, because you're not an innovator because you had a hackathon. You're only an innovator when the outputs of the hackathon became products and services in customers' hands.
Yeah, now it sounds very obvious, but before you explained all that, it was not so obvious for me that these are the core parts of corporate innovations, and not brainstorming ideas, creativities, etc. So guys, if you did not yet read the book Pirates in the Navy, we will put the link in the description of this interview. Go through the link and buy it, download it, and read it in your free time, because there is a lot of fun, a lot more smart and wise thoughts than we just discussed in this interview, and a lot of value. And meanwhile, Tendayi, the last question for today. During the pandemic, we faced a lot of cases where corporate innovation offices came to mind to have a look what is there in the startup world, but at the same time, they kind of were on pause because, you know, pandemic, no one knows what will happen, how it will end up, etc. And they were quite relaxed, like, okay, we do not have urgency because our big bosses don't know what will happen in a year or two after the end of pandemic. So we just observe, but not in an urgent way. What would you tell to these guys? How you will motivate them to act instead of wait and observe?
Yeah, like what are you observing? What are you looking for? That's a very strange thing, because like, it's hard to know whether you found something unless you know what you're looking for, right? Like, you have to start with, we came here because we want to see XYZ. So we came here to observe is the same thing as let's throw this on the wall and see if it sticks. Like, it's the same kind of practice. And so what I would say to them is that, like, they need to go back wherever they came from and have a conversation with their leadership around strategy. Like, what sort of innovations are we looking for? What changes are happening in the world that we think we might want to respond to? How do we think things are going to shake out after the pandemic for us as a company? You know, where are we seeing the biggest impacts? Which things are we trying to solve? Like, once those things are made explicit, then we can turn up to InnMind and go, we've got these strategic goals. Can you please show us the kind of things we should be looking at that will help us accomplish these goals? And then you can start to lead them to the startups that are connected to that, which helps them when they go back to their leadership, because they can say to the leaders, listen, you set us these goals and we found this startup and it solves this exact problem in this way, right? Rather than them going back and going, yeah, we were just with InnMind, and, you know, we saw this and we saw this and we saw that. Even the leaders don't have a place in their heads to plug that into, right? And so you really need to be creating those spaces to learn And you do that by setting up strategic hypotheses. If you don't do that, then there's no value in observation.
And it's again about relationship, because you can't just sit in your castle or bunker called the Corporate Innovation Office and observing the market and thinking what will be good or not for business units. Yes, you have to grow relationship and ask them what do they need, what are their strategic goals, etc. So it is kind of circle where you can't stop it.
Exactly. The worst thing that can happen to a corporate innovator is to celebrate that you've been given a lab or you've been given a budget. Like you could say, we have a lab. We've been given a budget to go and observe startups. We can go do that. Like, yay, we have support. Like being given a lab and being given a budget is not support. Like most of the money that we get as corporate innovators is chump change. It's not, it doesn't have a huge impact on the company's bottom line. So like, yeah, here's a couple of million, go do something. Like nobody cares about what we're doing. The moment you know you have support is when leaders say, here's $2 million. We have this stack of problems we need solved. These three are the top priority. Can you please make sure that the work that you do in the lab meets those goals, and then tell us what progress you're actually making. Then you know you've got both physical space, budget space, and strategic space to innovate. If you don't have strategic space to innovate, it doesn't matter that you have a lab or you have a budget to go and observe startups, because whatever you come back with, it has no place to sort of fit in. So you really need to be thinking about that.
Oh my God, I really love it. I wish there was enough space in YouTube title to write the name for the interview is the worst thing can happen with corporate innovation is to celebrate budget or lab. I love it so much. Tendayi, you are amazing. Thank you so much for your time and for your sharing your wisdom and expertise. We will describe the core points from this interview in the description. Put the links to amazing book that I recommend everyone to read. And I hope to see you in the next edition of our interviews in future. Thank you so much.